Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Yet another video game review in a sea of video game reviews, though I do feel like this is a game worth talking about, and that game is Rollerdrome. So this is an indie game developed by Roll7, and those are the developers of the well-respected Ollie Ollie skateboarding games. I never had the pleasure of playing them myself, but Ollie Ollie World, which came out earlier this year, looks fantastic. I rather doubt I'll have time to play it, seeing how many other games I have lined up for the rest of 2022. And then there are so many other interests that I have, such as cinema, music, literature, work, yoga, martial arts, and of course life. But no matter, if I miraculously do have a moment to try out, I think I will. If I don't, well, then you guys try it out for me, because it does look worth it. In any case, Roll 7 hasn't strayed too far from their skateboarding roots thematically, though they've taken quite a left turn in terms of gameplay. Rollerdrome is a third-person movement shooter game. It has an incredibly unique and intriguing game concept that's been turning heads. People have been describing this game as a fusion between Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and bullet hell shooters from the likes of Doom Eternal. Take those two and throw them into a soup of dystopian future world building, and you get Rollerdrome. Intriguing? I certainly think so. Though as intriguing as the game concept may be, I found that the initial moments were quite poor and didn't help sell the game's best qualities. Rollerdrome has a rather steep learning curve. This may result players being turned off from continuing further. I initially tried the game out during my lunch break, and one of my fellow colleagues was spying on me trying the game out for the first time. Unfortunately, they lost interest fast. It's totally possible that they were just back to focusing on their work, but it's interesting to wonder why that may have happened. A game's opening should be memorable and exciting. I should distill the game's essence in its first moments to give the player a taste of what kind of experience they're in for. First impressions are vital. A great example off the top of my head is The Last of Us. Very little in way of gameplay challenge, but what a heart-pounding and memorable experience. And that's not to say that all game engines need to be fast-paced and explosive, though I'll leave that topic for a deep dive in another future video. My point is, Rollerdrome starts out with several text tutorials. Generally, this has become a bit of a faux pas in making a good tutorial for your game. That is not to say that just because you have a text tutorial, you automatically have a bad game. In fact, one of my favorite games of all time is Persona 5, and it's a bloody masterpiece. Yet it has an 8-hour tutorial filled to the brim with text tutorials, for crying out loud. Thank God the narrative was strong enough to carry the rest of the experience, however. Anyway, rather than start with something dynamic and exciting and memorable, your flow comes to a screeching halt several times as you're taught the basics and must perform the same identical mechanics several times in a row to confirm your progression to the next mechanics you must perform X times before it is confirmed again. And then until the next mechanic. It's kind of redundant, and we've seen these kind of tutorials a bunch of times. It's not something to shout off the roofs over. I suspect that for many, initial impressions may instill sentiment that the controls are sluggish and leave you feeling incompetent, which isn't really a great feeling to have at the beginning of a game. So yeah, I found that was a very flat and uninspiring start. Though I can't sympathize with the need to teach the basics, because as I hinted at before, the difficulty curve is quite steep. Right out of the tutorial gates, you're immediately thrown into the frying pan where you must skate and fight for your life. Honestly, it was kind of punishing. This is yet another potential flow killer that could turn off new coming players. Wow, I'm making it sound like this is the worst tutorial in the world. Sorry if I'm slightly over dramatizing things, but I'm just giving my honest, unfiltered opinion. Now, all that being said, the good news is that once you get past the initial learning curve and begin to grasp how to leverage those navigation mechanics in tandem with the gunplay, that's when the game clicks. Literally from the first moment you enter that flow state, that's when the game starts to show its true color. From that point on, I found myself fiending for the next ride regardless if I win or lose. Before that, a failed run felt like an extremely frustrating event because you'd have to redo the whole thing all over again from the beginning. But now, even the failures have become all the more bearable because I've learned that the harder I fight, the more I find myself tapping into that incredible flow state. Honestly, this is some of the best gun fu I've seen in a while. John Wick and Max Payne would be proud. Of course, that killer gameplay wouldn't be possible if it didn't have the right stage to shine on. Rollerdrome doesn't have that many levels in the game, but I think they nailed the sandbox level design for the most part. It suits the game's needs perfectly. Another great example of where less is more. I'm enamored by the apparent simplicity of the gameplay spaces, yet blown away by how much room for flexibility and experimentation they offer. There's enough low-hanging fruit for non-expert players to leverage some cool navigation opportunities. But for the experts, there are some pretty advanced navigation paths you could take to gain gameplay advantages, of course, and look like $1,000,000 while you pull off your tricks. And that segues neatly into the next point of praise. Though you have infinite ammo on Rollerdrome, your only way to reload your guns is by performing tricks, which is a pretty brilliant way of keeping the players engaged and inviting experimentation for faster ammunition reloads, as well as increasing your score multiplier, of course. As for your arsenal, you have very few guns at your disposal. Specifically, you have 4 guns. though luckily they are a versatile bunch that bring variety and complement the game's flow incredibly well. Additionally, they are all extremely satisfying to use, each in their own unique way. My feelings are very similar regarding to the enemy archetypes. Once again, there are very few, maybe about 6 in the game, but their designs are simple, easy to identify in chaos, and challenging in varied ways. It's also worth mentioning that I appreciate the gameplay challenges listed for each level. They invite you to experiment the game's mechanics to the fullest degree. It was a smart design decision to get your story progression through the number of challenges you completed overall in the game, rather than purely for the level itself. It does defy narrative logic a bit, but I think that's a small price to pay since you as the player end up extracting the game's ultimate potential. It's an interesting way to incentivize players to play differently, which will expose them to using new tactics, new tricks, which leads to eventual mastery of the game's mechanics. Finally, Rollerdrome's narrative was a big surprise for me. You wouldn't expect to find such a rich mise-en-scène in this kind of game. Essentially, at the beginning of each milestone, you explore your locker room in first-person mode before proceeding into the arena. You can interact with a bunch of objects, read notes, listen to radio broadcasts, listen to conversations happening nearby, or read the newspaper. It's subtle, but there's honestly some very rich world building to be found here. I love how I can imagine all these background events going on in this clearly dystopian world. There's evidence of corruption and shady political dealings going on behind the scenes during the Rollerdrome tournament. Nothing is clearly explained, and I find that to be quite compelling. My only additional complaint in Rollerdrome is that the enemy spawning is completely random. You could be having a nearly flawless run only to bump into an enemy that happens to spawn right in front of you or just behind you. Yes, you do get used to the chaos. In fact, after a while, you achieve this Neo-like flow state where you're flying through the air, perfect dodging, and efficiently blasting through droves of enemy in no time. But in my opinion, it does breach ever so slightly in the red on the chaos meter. Ultimately, I had a complete sea change of my initial impressions of Rollerdrome. What a wicked game. It's always wonderful to have a game that stealthily sneaks in under the radar and takes us by storm. It's got a vivid art style, hosts intriguing world building elements, and has an absolutely kick-ass gameplay. Though I do feel at the beginning to be a bit of a clumsy start, I'm glad I stuck around with Rollerdrome because it 100% picks up the pace and builds into an exhilarating gameplay experience. This indie gem is surprising among the best games of the year. So in my humble opinion, I think that Rollerdrome finds itself easily in the 8.5 out of 10 category. What a ride. Literally. I haven't seen too many people talk about this game, so hopefully this video will help ever so slightly spread the good word about Rollerdrome. Honestly, it's wild to see just how many great indie games have come out in recent years. I think that for the most part, the indie scene has been leaving the AAA industry totally in the dust. Though unfortunately, they are at risk of passing beneath the radar. These games deserve all the support they can get, so spread the good word. Check out the game and let me know what you think. And as always, wishing you lots of love and health in your life. Take care, and until next time.